Welcome, everybody. My name is Ethan Knight, and I work here at Western Water Assessment at the University of Colorado Boulder. Thanks for joining us today. We're continuing our webinar series in today's webinar, where we will learn more about new climate information tools, followed by a Q&A. This webinar will cover a user guide to climate change portals, a new online resource designed to help people and communities acquire and interpret climate change information that is appropriate for their locality in the Mountain West and beyond. Jeff Lukas at Lukas Climate Research and Consulting and Julie Vano at the Aspen Global Change Institute will walk through the user guide and the 6 types of curated information resources that are highlighted in the guide. This webinar will also be covering Western Water Assessment's Utah Hazard Planning Tool, an online dashboard style tool that provides information about the past incidents, current risk, and future projections of climate hazards important to Utah, such as drought, wildfire, flooding, extreme heat, and others. Seth Arens will provide an overview of the information available in the tool and a brief demonstration on how to use it. Before we get started, I want to share a bit about Western Water Assessment for those of you who have not worked with us in the past. Western Water Assessment is an applied research program that addresses societal vulnerabilities to climate variability and climate change, particularly those related to water resources. We are based at the University of Colorado Boulder, the University of Utah, and the University of Wyoming, and we work across the Intermountain West, or Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming. Western Water Assessment is one of 11 teams in the NOAA Climate Adaptation Partnerships, or CAP program, formerly known as the Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessments, or RISA program. The presentation will be recorded and last about 30 to 40 minutes, followed by Q&A with Julie, Jeff, and Seth. Please feel free to submit questions via the Q&A window at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll be sure to share a link to the recording with you once it's up on our website. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Julie.
Great. It's great to be here. Let me share my screen. Can you see that? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so I'm excited today to share an online resource that we've been designing to help people and communities acquire the climate change information that they need. And I'll share a bit of the user's guide's origin story and general context, and then I'll pass it along to Jeff Lukas, who will give us a quick tour. So this guide fits within a larger project that's part of the Mountain West Climate Services Partnership with James Arnott, Vinay Duncan, Missy Stoltz, and myself. We were funded by NOAA's Sectoral Applications Research Program to focus on enhancing preparedness by matching existing resources with community needs. The project aim was to uncover ways to bring together the scientists and communities to prepare for risks to water in the Mountain West, with a big emphasis of the project being on identifying shared climate change risks as temperatures rise, as snowpacks diminish, and then to provide appropriate resources. So this includes taking stock of the changes that we're seeing. So here's a map from the 4th National Climate Assessment. We see increases in annual average temperature over the past 30 years relative to what's occurring earlier this past century. Similarly, here's a map of changes in average precipitation, which indicates some wetting, but mostly drying in the West. And then these changes also translate into changes in snowpack and stream flow, and really can give you a better sense of the current trends. But people are also really interested in knowing how these values might change in the coming years. And so we had access to lots of climate change data or future projections, and we're considering how we might go about using that to create a tool that we could share climate information with communities across the West. However, before we started, we decided to check and see what sort of information was already available. And so we spent time compiling a list of portals, and our list just kept growing. So in a very simple desktop analysis, we uncovered over 30 different climate change portals. And I've spent a lot of time understanding climate change information, and I love getting into the weeds, but I was actually feeling a little overwhelmed by all of this. So where should you go to get the information you're looking for? how similar or how different are these portals, what's more credible. It really did feel like the Wild West. And I was just searching on my own and asking colleagues. I knew I wasn't capturing it all. And so we were really fortunate to be able to partner with Corey Knapp at the University of Wyoming and Lisa Dilling at Western Water Assessment. They did a survey of researchers asking them what online portals they use for accessing climate change projections. And in the results of their survey, they found over 60 different portals, so kind of twice the hair pulling out. And so we really wanted to spend time and thinking about, instead of creating another place where people can go to download the information directly, what could we do? And could we help to really curate and guide people to these existing portals? And we were really fortunate to bring Jeff Lukas's expertise to help us think through and sort these different climate change portals. So our objective of this user guide is really to help people and communities navigate to and acquire and interpret climate change information. So who do we mean when we say users? This could be staff for cities, counties, and local entities, consultants who assist them, other climate change service providers, and the research community as a whole as well. And we really hope this guide is helpful in answering your questions directly, or it could also be a resource that you point others to when you get questions from them about where to start looking to access climate change information. And so to that end, to help to share what is in the guide, we created a 4-page overview, which you can access directly on the portal's webpage, or I'll put a link to it in the chat. But this is really a way for you to be able to share kind of the essence of what the guide provides, and then go to the website directly for more details. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Jeff to give you a tour. But before doing that, I really wanted to acknowledge the many people who have helped us in making this guide. And here's a list of folks who provided really, really valuable feedback. It includes both users of the climate change information and also those who develop the portals that we share within the guide. And we're so grateful to have their help in making this guide more accurate and usable. And we're also still looking for feedback. We opted to put this online so that it could evolve as the climate information and users' needs evolve. So we're aiming to continue and update this if it does indeed prove to be really useful to the community. And so without further ado, I am going to pass the mic over to Jeff, and he can give you a tour.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Thanks all of you who have joined. And I see, just looking at the list of who's on, that we've got folks from every category that we saw as likely and ideally users of our user guide to climate portal. So that's great. So I'm going to use the rest of our time to walk through the guide itself. And you're seeing the homepage at the AGCI website. And if you scroll down, you'll see 6 square icons that correspond to the different types of portals and other information resources. And I know it's tempting to just click on them, but let's scroll down first to before you begin. And here we recommend that folks first ask themselves what the information will be used for, since that really helps determine what type of information is needed and thus where to go to find it. And then once you have a better sense of what information is out there online, you can refine your initial idea of what you needed. We also have 4 examples of information that was actually needed by different municipalities in the Mountain West in the last several years to help spur thinking about this. And then we've got a glossary to help navigate the thicket of acronyms, and then a primer on climate models and projections. And This will tell you, for example, if you didn't already know, that CMIP-5 refers to the most broadly used and available set of global climate model projections, and then CMIP-6 is a newer set that is not yet as available. And it will also tell you that CMIP-6 is not necessarily better than CMIP-5. So back to the main page, here under places to go, we also provide a schematic of the different kinds of information that are available from the first 4 types of resources of the 6 in total. So these 4 are really all about climate change projections and related information. And they kind of exist on this spectrum from easier to use, but fewer user choices, interactive choices, but also more context for data. And then down here, resources that are harder to use, you have more flexibility in how you can analyze the data, but you also are provided less context for it, at least on that portal. Okay, back to the top of the main page. Now we can click on one of the icons. And the first one we list, and for a good reason, is climate assessments. Because we feel that many of the needs for climate change information don't require a portal per se. The information that you need can probably be found in one of several recent climate assessments covering the US and specific portions of the Mountain West, including the states of Washington, Oregon, California, New Mexico, Colorado, Montana, and Greater Yellowstone. Now, and there are also another 20 or so state level climate assessments for other parts of the country if you are not in the Mountain West. And these assessments are great resources for well-vetted summary statements, for basic maps and charts of recent and projected future climate changes for that state or region, or in this case for the NCA, the whole country. And for each of these assessments, we describe very briefly what's in it, where to find particular information, what summary statements and maps, and what sector impacts are covered, any ancillary information that's provided, and then what specifically what downscaled or other climate projections are used, and then of course a link to the report. So, we've got New Mexico, Greater Yellowstone, Oregon, California, Montana, Colorado, Washington State. We also describe briefly the latest IPCC reports, which can be useful for general background on climate change science, though of course not as good for region specific, that is within the West, and certainly not local information. But it's good to know they're there and what's available. And then we finally list or highlight several reports that are not full-on climate assessments, but do cover climate change projections for some or all of the Mountain West. And again, these are great resources, but you or the folks you're working with may well need more locally specific or detailed information. So back up. Portals for visualizing climate change data. These are interactive portals that allow you to produce maps and plots of projected future climate variables. And here in this first button under comprehensive, we've identified 3 of these portals: the Climate Explorer by NOAA and partners, the Climate Toolbox developed by researchers at University of California, Merced, and the National Climate Change Viewer developed by USGS scientists. We feel that these are the most comprehensive, versatile, and user-friendly. And so we spend more time on the user guide of going through these. And so for each of them, we describe, kind of a basic summary, give some upsides and downsides of this particular portal, what climate projections they use, what variables you can see and have analyzed and visualized, which visualizations, and then what kind of data can be downloaded, and where to find the how-to or help guidance. Now, you may need climate change projection information that is not available from one of these three. You might want additional capabilities or other information. And so we have identified another 10 portals that we call targeted portals that offer at least some special features beyond what's in the big three comprehensive portals. Most of these cover the US, some the entire globe, and some cover only portions of the Mountain West, like California and Nevada. And then for each of these, we give a one-line summary of what it is, and then identify the special features, and then a link to the site. So if you want to do more, even more than this with climate projections, like make your own plots or conduct additional analyses, nearly all of the 13 total visualization portals also allow users to download some data. But typically the download is limited to the summarized data as shown in a particular plot or map that you just created using the portal. If you want access to a full set of daily or monthly data for multiple projections over a future period, then you need to go to a different type of portal. And here we're getting more advanced. And so there are many places to download climate change projections. Most of them are kind of for the pros, people who are used to shuttling around terabytes of information. We highlight two climate data download portals here that were designed to be accessible to advanced practitioners as well as researchers. And they can do some custom data aggregation. So you're not dealing with terabytes of data, you're dealing with kind of a summary file, and they can output those files in multiple formats, including formats that can be like ASCII, that can be easily read into a spreadsheet if you're not conversant in things like NetCDF. And between the two portals here, the GDO DCHP that is on the Lawrence Livermore National Lab site and was co-produced by Bureau of Reclamation, Army Corps, and a number of partners. And then the MACA download tools, which is associated with the climate toolbox. You can download CMIP5 projections that have been downscaled using several different methods, including LOCA, BCSD, BCCA, and then in the MACA download tools, of course, CMIP5 MACA. And so for each of these, we identify upsides, downsides, key characteristics, and the available projection data. Now, even with all the curation we've done here, it may still be a little overwhelming to confront the many options for obtaining climate change information from assessments and from these portals. So we also created a comparison table. And this link is also found on the home pages of the other three resource types I've just shown. And this table may be itself a little overwhelming at first. It's split into two pages to display all of the columns. On the far left of both pages, we list all of the climate assessments here in green, the data visualizing portals in yellow, and then the data download portals in the pink color. And then across, we have check marks indicating the set of climate projections used, CMIP5, CMIP6, both the specific emission scenarios that are used, the downscaling methods that are used for the available data, the climate variables, hydrology variables, and then on the next page, the data visualizations that are available, the time periods that the data is aggregated into in the graphics and analyses. For the interactive portals, what types of regions, watershed, state, county, grid box, can be selected on that portal, what data is available for download, and then what are the data formats. So we also highlight here portals for exploring historical climate data, because for just about any application of climate change information, obtaining historical data is a necessary complement to projections of future climate to help put those projections into context. Once again, there are many portals out there from which to obtain this information, and here we highlight two of them. First, the NOAA Climate at a Glance tool that I probably use more myself personally than any other single climate data portal on the web. And then also the Climate Toolbox, which we just highlighted as one of the comprehensive climate change portals. It also has several tools for exploring historical climate. So once you obtain the climate change data you're looking for, that's a big step, but it's typically only part of what's needed to inform a planning or adaptation process. And so we have this button and page here. And I have to say, this is an area that we didn't and couldn't cover as thoroughly as we did the climate assessments and portals. So think of this section as more of a starter list, with several entry points into this very important and diverse space. And for some folks, it'll be well worth looking at some of these resources before looking at any of the climate portals. So we have some sites that provide guidance on climate adaptation and preparedness, starting with the Steps to Resilience featured in the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit, leading practices, and again, brief summary link to that resource. Then our second type of resource here is climate service providers. That is the entities with actual people who can help communities and others find and apply climate information. And there are a wide variety of climate service providers, university programs like Western Water Assessment, government agencies, nonprofits like AGCI, and increasingly for-profit consultancies like me. And on this page, we have a few links to the NOAA RESA, now the CAP teams, and state climatologist offices, but you can also click this link to the Mountain West Climate Services Partnership, which is a consortium coordinated by AGCI. And at the bottom of this page is a list of 9 participating organizations that you can potentially reach out to for information and help, or you can send an email to climateservices@agci.org right there, and they'll try to match you with organizations that can assist you. All right. All right, so that is a lot of information about how to get climate change information. And we don't want to be too glib about climate projections. With the user guide, we hope we've made the process of finding and exploring these data easier, but the interpretation and application of climate projections are still really challenging, even for those of us who have been in this business for a long time. So with that, I will unshare, and I think we hold questions until the end. So thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Good morning. My name is Seth Arens, and this morning I'll be talking with you about a new climate information tool that Western Water Assessment recently developed, the Utah Hazard Planning Tool. So just to provide a little background first, when Western Water Assessment develops a climate information tool like this, it's come through stakeholder requests or needs of stakeholders that we've understood through working with regional stakeholders. Now, in this case, this particular tool really stemmed from work that Western Water Assessment was doing on the topic of hazard planning in Utah. In 2019, Western Water Assessment provided information about how climate change will impact climate hazards in Utah for the state's 2019 revision of their hazard mitigation plan. After that plan was published, in conversations with managers from the State Division of Emergency Management, we understood that they really needed some more information about how climate change would impact climate hazards. Well, shortly after that, there was a special call for funding from the program that funds NOAA CAP programs. And this particular grant was to foster connections on how climate change can be integrated into hazard planning in our region. So Western Water Assessment worked with another similar CAP program, the Southern Climate Impacts Program. And on this collaborative project, we worked with SCIP primarily because they had developed a similar climate information tool called the Simple Planning Tool that was designed to provide hazard planners in Oklahoma information about the past incidents of hazards within their state. So throughout this process, we engaged with stakeholders in Utah. In this case, it was the hazard planning community within Utah at various points with that during the tool development process. And this included individuals working for federal, state, county, and local organizations involved in hazard planning. So the Utah Hazard Planning Tool, the big picture of this is to develop a climate information resource specifically for organizations working in the field of hazard planning in Utah. And the idea of this was to provide resources, the best resources. And so this is kind of a curated resource. It's not meant to be comprehensive of every single resource available, but the best resources available that provide information about the past incidents of hazards, current risks, and where possible, future projections of these hazards. And all along, at multiple points along the way, early in tool development, partway through, and at the end of this, we engaged with stakeholders in Utah, ranging from between the various workshops that we held on this topic. We engaged 40 to 50 different stakeholders involved with hazard planning in Utah. And the end result of this, there were two products that come out of it. One was a report style tool, and the other was an interactive dashboard style tool. While they provide mostly the same information, I'm going to talk a little bit about both of these resources. So first, we published the Utah Hazard Planning Tool in a report format in April of 2022. This is available on our website at this address. And I think Ethan will put in the link to the report format of the Utah Hazard Planning Tool. So this tool includes information about hazards that are specific to Utah. These hazards are also relevant to many other states in the West, many other states within the Western US. But these are the hazards that are both pertinent to Utah and specifically planned for by the State Division of Emergency Management. These include avalanche, cold temperature extremes, dam or levee failure, debris flow, drought, flooding, heat extremes, landslide, wildfire, wind event, and winter storms. There are kind of two general information types that we can bin these information resources into. The first of those is those information resources that provide information about historical incidents of climate hazards or current risk. And there's many different types of information streams that this could be, including historical records of the hazard, information that provides frequency or severity of the hazard, climatology of a particular hazard, if that's relevant, current information about risk. Some of this may be in map form, and also where there's limitations to data sets that are available. The second type of information that's provided here goes under the kind of the heading of climate change. So how is climate change going to impact a specific hazard? In some cases, there are projections about the incidence of a future hazard. For example, extreme heat or extreme cold. However, tools do not exist for every climate hazard. This is the case, say, for wildfire. However, while there's not specific tools that are going to project the incidence or extent of wildfire, there are tools that project some of the climatology that goes into increased wildfire risk. For each hazard in this report style, this report format, even where there are not tools that provide projections of the climate hazard. There's a brief summary of how climate change will impact that hazard, including a statement about the certainty, scientific certainty of that change and what the general direction of that change is. So now just to give you a little bit of an idea of what the format is of this report and the kind of information that's provided. This is a table that comes out of the report providing information for cold temperature extremes. At the top of the table, there's a statement about the limitations of the data. This may include information about the period of record, the overall scope of the data, geographic extent. The topmost information resources are resources that are going to give information about the historical incidence of the hazard and current risks. Under the title of each information resource is provided the period of record that that resource covers and the organization that provides the information. There's a link to each climate information resource where you can access the data itself or the data display. And there's also a brief paragraph that summarizes the kind of data that's available, and in some cases gives brief instructions on how to access that data. Many of these resources are pretty self-explanatory to use. A few of them have a little bit more complex interfaces, and there's just a brief description of how to get to the data that is most important. And at the bottom of these tables includes the section on climate change impacts. Where possible, there's a tool that provides projections for future climate hazard. In this case, there are tools that project future temperature and cold extremes. And regardless whether there are tools available or not, there is a summary for every hazard that talks about how climate change is expected to impact that hazard and what the level of scientific certainty is in a general way about changes to that hazard. So after the report was completed in spring of last year, I moved on to adapting that report style format to an online dashboard style tool. And that dashboard style tool is available on our website, either in the link that's displayed here, which will also, Ethan will also put up in the chat so you can take a look at it yourself. Or from our homepage under the resources tab, there is a sub tab called Utah Hazard Planning, and that will take you right to this page here on the screen. In general, the Utah Hazard Planning dashboard was modeled after the Intermountain West Climate Dashboard, a resource that we've had available for many years on our website. One key difference between this resource and the Intermountain West Climate Dashboard is that most of the infographics on this site are static images. They're just images that are showing an example of the kind of data that may be available. A few of these are updated to current risks, but most of them are static resources. The link to each resource is provided, and also a short description and instructions for each resource. And again, to reiterate the resources that are available, I'm just going to quickly scroll through the different climate hazards that are presented and gives you a quick view of the sorts of information available for wildfire, drought, extreme heat, heavy rainfall and flooding, dam failure, debris flow, landslide, wind events, cold temperature extremes, winter storms, and avalanche. In all, there's 45 different climate information resources that are presented for these 11 different climate hazards. And again, I just want to emphasize that this is not meant to be an exhaustive list of resources. This is meant to be a curated list that provides to our Western Water Assessments understanding some of the best resources that are available. And I'd like to, for each climate information resource, there is there may be several, or for each climate hazard, there may be several resources that are presented. These are generally presented chronologically, with the first handful of information resources giving information about the historical incidence of that climate hazard. The next resource is giving information about the current risk of that hazard. Sometimes this might be where there might be some real-time information and infographics that are updated regularly. And then finally, where available, information that provides future projections of that hazard. Finally, I'd just like to visually walk you through how you can access these various bits of data on the Utah Climate Hazard Dashboard. So for example, for heavy rainfall and flooding, if you click on an infographic, this infographic expands and you get a little better view at it so you can see it clearly. And this is really just meant to provide an example of the kind of data that's available and how that data is displayed. Where applicable, it's listed under the infographic what the period of record is that the data is presented and the frequency at which that information is updated. If you click on this info icon with the question mark, this brings up a dialog box that provides a summary of the kind of information available, and in some cases gives detailed instructions on how to access that data on that particular site. And then finally, if you click on the title of each climate information resource, that brings you to the web page where you can access that resource. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and we'll kind of turn it back over to Ethan.
All right, thank you all for the awesome presentations. We'll start the Q&A now. Pull it up here. We have a question now. Says, great resources. Thanks for developing them. General question, what do you think is the most important to continue to improve climate services?
I'll take a stab at that. I think you need people. There's an aspect of this work that can't be done, just through portals and just through resources, no matter how well constructed they are. You need to have people that establish relationships. They could be short, they could be very long term, with practitioners, other stakeholders, and information users. And that's how the work gets done in climate service provision, is through people and relationships.
I'll maybe play off that a little bit. One of the things that we found when we were convening communities across the Mountain West, it was people and then also peers. So being able to have conversations with each other and to have the resources within one's organization to just begin to have some of those conversations. And then it's great to pull in the boundary spanners, the climate scientists into those conversations, but making space within organizations and how to go about making those resources possible would be huge in moving us all forward.
Great.
Yeah, great points.
Yeah. This is a question for Seth. Can you share more about the engagement process with Utah decision makers and hazard planners? And what did you learn from them, and how did it impact the tool itself?
Sure. Early on in the project, for Western water assessment, this was an opportunity to engage with, I guess, a new set of stakeholders. While we had some relationships with hazard planners in Utah specifically, it was pretty much just at the state level. So this was an opportunity to develop new relationships. As I mentioned, I think in total, we engaged with 40 or 50 stakeholders working at different levels of hazard planning. This included, I would say, after the state level, lots of participation from the State Division of Emergency Management, which is the state organization that deals with hazard planning, and lots of different planners at the county level. That's kind of the next level in Utah, is planning at the county level, and it's actually more the groups of counties, the Association of County Governments, that's really the next level down. There are some counties that have planning, but for the most part, especially the rural counties in Utah, they're grouped into the Association of County Governments, and then some local planners as well. And then there were several participants from various federal agencies involved. Trying to think now, lots of people from the NRCS, a few people from FEMA were involved. I think someone from Department of Homeland Security. So I felt like we had really pretty good representation, not necessarily everyone involved in hazard planning in Utah, but a good representation from different parts of the state, since these workshops were held back during COVID. So they were all online workshops, which, while you miss the face-to-face interaction, it does give you the opportunity to engage with people from across the state of Utah at relatively no cost to them, just time for that 1 or 2 hours during a workshop.
Great, thank you. All right, let's see. This one says, is this user guide linked to environmental and climate science educator professional certifying organizations?
Is it linked to, interesting question, to environmental educators? As to whether we've got links on the site directly to those sorts of organizations? No, and that's not a bad idea at all. Julie, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, I think please provide that feedback, and if there are places to link in both directions too, if this is a resource that could be of use to
right,
those organizations as well. Like, I'm not entirely sure. I think I could see opportunities in both of those places.
Yep.
So Fawn, thank you for your question, and please follow up with ways in which we can connect.
All right, and after the webinar, or right after the Q&A, I'll put our emails in the chat. That way you all can, and keep the conversations going. All right, this next question. Do you see tools on the horizon to help water managers deal with the uncertainties and projections? And how do they choose what futures to plan for?
Yeah. Julie, do you want to? I've got some thoughts, but
well, uncertainty is such a challenge, and I think some of these tools do talk a bit about the uncertainty, but that's always a place that could use more discussion. But it's also, I think, some of the other tools that aren't necessarily the data tools point to ways in which to think about uncertainty outside the realm of just getting the range of what those answers are, but to build resilient systems and to think about kind of the adaptation space through scenario planning or through other means, so that you're not kind of paralyzed by the uncertainty element of all of this. And I know water planners deal with uncertainty all the time, so that's not new, but I think it's one of the challenges that we're gonna continue to face. And I would love to hear Jeff or Seth if you have additional comments.
Yeah, I'd say there's no way to get around the need to consider multiple climate futures, as potentially as part of an ensemble of futures that are characterized in other ways besides climate, in scenario planning or a similar approach. Now, the question I think I was hearing was, okay, but how do you decide which, climate or hydrology futures you should choose? And I don't know that there's ever going to be a tool that will help, say, oh, you should, take the 10th percentile, the 90th percentile, because the number of scenarios and how they fall out across the entire range of the guidance we get from the climate models, it's going to depend on the vulnerabilities that are inherent to your system, as to what you should be focusing on in that kind of multiple future planning approach. And so, typically we recommend, a combined, top down, that is from the climate projections, and bottom up approach, where you kind of meet in the middle and choose hydrology scenarios, for example, from among the distribution of what comes out of climate and hydrology models. Choose ones that are particularly stressful to your system, that you hit those soft points that you already know exist, so that you're testing them against a physically plausible future. As far as how to fill out a range, there's no one way. We know what the bad way is, and the bad way is to assume a single future that looks a lot like the past. And so if we can just getting beyond that is extremely important and helpful.
I guess the one thing I'd add, other than, just echoing scenario planning, I think for some time to come is going to be the best way to deal with that uncertainty. I guess one other thing I'd say, and this is not really a solution, but kind of just something I've been thinking about a bit more that I think would be useful to provide users with information about where we are in global emission wise, in terms of present day, the last 5-10 years, and what trajectory we're on. I know myself over the last couple of years, I've kind of shifted from several years ago. Sometimes I would kind of trend a little bit towards the high emission scenario as being more likely. But as we've seen, emissions have decreased some the last several years, that we're actually not on that highest emission trajectory anymore. We could in the future, but we're not right now. So I think one thing that could be useful is a tool that would really kind of track where we're at with global emissions in reference to the different emission scenarios that we're on. And that's something that I think a little bit about when I'm providing information, not to give concrete answers of, yes, use this scenario, use that scenario, but just a little bit of information that can maybe hedge thinking one way or another based on emissions over the last period of time.
Yep. No, Seth, that's a great point. And I'll point out that in the primer on climate models and projections that I showed, that's part of our user guide to climate portals, we do discuss emission scenarios, what assumptions those are based on, and the shift that we've seen in recent years away from RCP 8.5 type emissions closer to RCP 6 or even 4.5.
But one problem with that too is I might want to say RCP 6 is a good one to look at, but that's not available from CMIP 5 under most of the information sources, because the thinking in the past was bracket that with this moderate and this high. The reality is we may be a little bit looking more like an RCP 6 right now. That's not information that's as readily available.
Yep. So this is another thing to keep in mind as you're trying to select from among different climate futures, is because even under a single emission scenario, there's still a broad range of outcomes. And so you could shade, say, to the upper end of RCP 4.5 outcomes to give you more of an RCP 6 flavor, for example.
Great, thank you. This next question says, great resources and presentations. Thank you. As practitioners, it's always overwhelming in selecting the GCMs, downscaling methods, and credibility of the available data. Are there any guidance or resources in this regard?
So I could speak to that to some extent. I was a part of an effort a while back that came up with do's and don'ts for how you go about using climate information in water planning and management, and I can share the link to the portal there, and that provides kind of general guidelines, but it doesn't say which GCM or which downscaling method, or it's not instructive in that way. But I think what is instructive is what GCMs, what downscaling methods you use are really driven by the questions that you're asking. So really identifying what it is that you're asking, and then reach out to the people who have been in this space to just have a conversation about what makes the most sense given your resources, given how you're going about thinking of using the information. And I think it goes back to what Jeff said at the beginning. It's a lot about people and building those relationships with people who have expertise in a variety of different things.
No, I think that's great advice. I'll go out on a bit of a limb here because I've done some comparisons for the state of Colorado and a large water provider, right? Asking the same question: which downscaling, data set or downscale data set should we use? And while again, yes, there are particulars for every particular application that need to be considered. Of the two that are most widely available now, CMIP5 Loca, CMIP5 Maca, I'd say they're pretty much equivalent in terms of robustness, or they're kind of the industry leaders. And for particular uses, like looking at, say, precipitation extremes, there might be a reason, especially given your region, to look at one versus another. But I'd say for most uses, you will be in good hands with either CMIP5 Maca or CMIP5 Loca. And those are the ones that are most available from the portals that we describe in the user guide.
Great. All right, thank you. Next question. I have found a knowledge gap related to the North American monsoon. I need a primary document portal. Does this exist?
Check. Let's see. I'm trying to remember what we wrote. Look for and this is a Western Water product in 2020, the Colorado River Basin Climate and Hydrology State of the Science report. So that's available through the Western Water website. We have a chapter describing the climate of the Colorado River Basin. The lower basin especially is highly influenced by the North American monsoon. And I know we reference at least three or four good overview or review papers about the monsoon. I'm trying to think of like the most accessible and lengthy description of it. You might also check the CLIMAS program, which is the CAP, a NOAA-funded CAP program based at the University of Arizona. So that's climas.arizona.edu. CLIMAS, and they have a lot of resources about the monsoon, and see if you find something there.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Questions. Okay. This one's for Jeff or Julie. So it says, you mentioned that CMIP6 isn't necessarily better than CMIP5 for some uses. Could you share more about that?
Sure. So, objectively, you can look at some aspects of the models broadly and say, okay, CMIP6 models, they're the next generation. Most of the CMIP6 model participants, and there are now well over 50, from dozens of research groups and modeling centers around the world. Most of these models were also, or a previous variant or generation, were represented in CMIP5. And so you can look at that and say, well, this is the next generation. Overall, the CMIP6 models have higher resolution. They represent more processes. Arguably, the parameters are more finely tuned to now a longer set of observations. But then if you look at for a particular region, say Colorado, you look at the spread of the model solutions, what kind of futures is the set of models showing us across 30, 40 models. CMIP6 does not have a narrower range, and for most variables is pretty close to CMIP5. And there are some issues with CMIP6 we talk about in that primer, including a large handful of models in CMIP6 that are believed to be running unrealistically hot over both the late 20th century and into the 21st century, what's been called the hot model problem. There's now some guidance on how to resolve that, but CMIP6 could end up being a better tool for some applications, certainly better for a lot of research applications, exploring different climate dynamics for the kinds of stakeholders and decision makers and managers I see on this webinar. I think CMIP 5 is still your go-to for the foreseeable future. And it doesn't hurt to look at what CMIP 6 offers, especially if it shows you something a little different for your region, but not necessarily, it doesn't supplant CMIP 5. As we go from generation to generation in the models, we're seeing, you could say, less improvement per generation in how much fidelity the models have to observed features of the climate system and historical patterns. And so we're getting a little, from the user side, we're getting a little less bang for the buck, even though you could say the research applications are still numerous and expanding.
Great. All right, thank you. Another question here. Could you please talk us through a real world example from the Climate Portal Guide?
Ooh, boy, okay, this might be the last question. I thought about this and I was like, I can't get this down to a minute or two. So let me share screen and see what I can do in a few minutes left, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So going back to here, so this is an actual example. Back when I was with Western Water Assessment about 4 years ago, I was contacted by I think a biologist from the Forest Service out in Western Colorado, who was working on an environmental assessment for a reservoir renovation project up on the top of Grand Mesa, this big flat-topped, mesa at about 10 to 11,000 feet east of Grand Junction. And his question was, by mid-century, so 2050 to 2060, will Grand Mesa still have a snowmelt dominated hydrology like it does now? Will the snowpack still be deep enough that it is its accumulation and melt cycle is still the major driver of the hydrology of the creeks and rivers that come off of the mesa? And so obviously I didn't have this user guide at the time, but this is how I go through it now, is I go to that comparison table and I'd look and see which one of these has snowpack or snow. Okay, so I'm looking at hydrology variables over on the right, and I go down, I'm looking, I think I'd look at the top 3 first. So I see both the climate toolbox and the National Climate Change Viewers will give me some snow output. But I'm thinking I want to look at box plots to show me, to help me and my colleague at the Forest Service better visualize the range of future projections relative to the historical snowpack. And so I'm going to go to data visualizations and look at box plots. And I see that the climate toolbox is the one that has box plots. So I'll go back to here, click on climate toolbox, visit the site. Now, you wouldn't know this exists unless you had spent some time on Climate Toolbox already, but there is a future box plots tool, very handy. And so if I open that up, let's go to the tool. First, I want to choose a location, and because Grand Mesa is essentially flat, I can look at a point and say that's generally representative of the top of Grand Mesa. So set the location. It's not quite, it's set now to maximum temperature in the summer. So let's change the variable, go down to hydrology variables. Let's go to snow water equivalent. We don't want December 1st. Let's look at April 1st, closer to the peak of the snowpack. And here we're looking at RCP 8.5, so the higher emissions that we think is probably less likely now, but that's our starting point. And we'll see we've got at that point, the historical average has been about a little over 12 inches of snow water equivalent on April 1st. And it's saying by mid-century, under the higher emission scenario, there will be 9 to 10. So about a 20%, 25% reduction in 30 years, 40 years under the high emission scenario. Go to RCP 8.5, and even though it doesn't look like it because the axis has changed, there's actually less of a reduction. It goes from 12.5 down to about 10. And you can see here's that range across, in this case, 10 model projections that they ran through a hydrology model. And so you can see, yes, there is a sizable and measurable reduction in snow water equivalent across virtually all of the models by mid-century. But there's still enough snow left on the ground in April 1st to say, yes, this will still be a snow melt dominated hydrology. So that was, I took this information, some other information from from Climate Toolbox, wrote it up into a 4-page memo, and that was sort of the basis of my finding for the Forest Service biologist. So there we go.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jeff. That was great. And I think with that, and it's a little past noon Mountain Time here, I think that'll do it for the webinar today. But thank you so much for your presentations, Julie, Jeff, and Seth. That was really great. And for the audience, if we didn't get to your questions today, we'll make sure to answer them via email. And let me put our emails in the chat here. No, it's not working. Okay, well, let me do that. Anyway, and also, we also have a survey that we've developed. It should take about 1 to 2 minutes of your time at most. And it's our way to gather feedback on the webinar and what you liked about it, what we could do better in the future. And it'd be very appreciated if you could fill that out. And also, lastly, with all of you who registered and who attended today, I will send out an email with the recording of the webinar as soon as possible. And I guess my screen's frozen. I apologize. I don't know why I can't send these emails. Yeah, so sorry about that. But let me, I'll figure that out. I can send you all the emails and then you can keep the conversations going. But thank you again for joining, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.